Alright, this video will just be a response to the comments from the last video on the discussion of why do people hate BfA so much. There was this one channel I used to watch that shut down like last year called Idea Channel, where they would pose a topic and then the next week they would make a video dedicated to replying to comments and then another video asking a new topic. And I thought I'd probably do that here considering just the amount of comments I got. You see, the usual WoW news video on this channel gets anywhere from like 20 to 30 comments at most, and the discussion video got like almost 200. I had to go through and pick comments that were kind of similar, because I can't reply to all of them. But there was also so many good ones that I wanted to read, so this video might be a little long. First one. In my opinion, BfA has the worst overall gameplay that WoW has seen in at least the last 10 years. There's a lot of good in the game right now, but the moment-to-moment action is frankly abysmal. I've been an Altaholic for 10 years, playing anywhere from 8 to 15 characters concurrently in expansion, with Mop and Legion seeing me approach gear cap on as many as 5 toons at the end of each of their final tiers. I've been a casual player, some expansions, and cutting-edge PvE players others. And of 5 classes I'm currently playing, Warrior, DH, Monk, Hunter, and Paladin, with the exclusion of Fury and Arms Warriors, all are in their weakest state in the last 10 years. What they've done to Elemental Shamans in particular actually makes me very sad, as they took some of the most engaging gameplay I've seen in years, stripped it of all of its momentum and meaningful choices, and then repackaged baseline elements of its Legion counterpart as new talents. I created a new Shaman to raid in Mythic Plus on in Legion, and put 92 days / played on him in that expansion, and he's been completely abandoned this expansion entirely for gameplay reasons. Yeah, this is an argument that comes up a lot, and it's also one of the cornerstone arguments for why people don't like BfA, is that they neutered too much from a lot of classes. A lot of classes feel just like lesser versions of themselves from their Legion counterparts. Because in Legion, they completely redesigned a ton of the classes, like almost all of them. And then artifacts and the Legion legendaries completely altered them even more, so there was a lot to those new classes that people had to get used to. And then in BfA, they didn't add anything new, they just took things away and added Gcd changes to them. You know, with the exception of my Disc Priest, who plays completely fine and actually rewards a high skill cap. Like, with the Disc Priests, your healing is dependent on how much you deal damage and how much you heal people, so you can't focus exclusively on one or the other. If you only ever heal people, you'll never actually deal enough damage for Atonement to be worth using. And if you only deal damage, the Atonements will fall off. So you have to mix both of them together. And that's where the fun of the gameplay comes through. Pretty much every fight is different. Whereas on other healers I've tried out, it's kind of boring since all you're doing is healing, and I kind of feel like other healers are just having a worse time when they could be having fun playing a Disc Priest. You know, just to say, my specific class that I play personally is great, and actually does very well in raids, to the point where it's getting nerfed this patch. But I also understand that a lot of other specs don't feel anywhere near as fun. Alright, next one. 724, and that's where it all fell apart. People have known that developers have been biased on classes, specifically Disc Priests, for a while, like in Legion. Just a little note here, I'm probably going to be messing up some of these since I'm reading them for the first time. And I'm not going to edit the audio on this to have my readings come out perfectly like I do with normal scripts. But then comes BfA, and really magnifies how broken they are, so it's undeniable anymore how messed up they are. If you got lucky and your class was not butchered, you're fine. You'll even love the expansion, because the majority of playing a game is feeling good about playing the game. And if your class is shit, you won't enjoy it. See, this kind of goes into my part. I personally have been having fun with the game, but that's because my class is great. Whereas a lot of other classes, like the guy in the previous comment, aren't so great. And if the fundamental gameplay is boring, well, of course you'd probably get bored of the game itself. Kind of like the reasons why I don't play Path of Exile. I like the idea of Path of Exile, I love all the customization options they have, but I don't find the actual gameplay itself fun. And I also find it kind of ugly. Whereas with Diablo 3, even though there's a lot less customization, kind of, well, compared to Path of Exile, and way less content, I'll still play every season because I like the gameplay. If they just, like, gave Path of Exile Diablo 3's gameplay, that would probably be my favorite game ever. But because the gameplay itself is fundamentally boring to me, I sadly just don't play Path of Exile, even though it's like the perfect game for me. Alright, next one. How about making a strong raid and put a hold to tier sets for a while, just like the vanilla, so people can think of defeating the game more like back in the day. Brings back the solidarity between players. As for why people hate BfA, the storyline is taken away from the MMORPG elements, I think, even from way back with the Kata expansions. The idea of becoming the chosen one. It's true, like Lazy Peon said on his reasons he's excited for Classic WoW video. By the way, I agree on your player housing. So for this one, I'm kind of confused on what the first sentence is saying. Making a strong raid but putting a hold on tier sets for a while. They always put a hold on tier sets. They rarely release a tier set in the first raid of the expansion. And they're not going to have any this expansion. And having a strong raid, I think that means a raid that doesn't go down within the first 2 weeks. You see, this is from a fundamental shifting of the game from when Vanilla WoW was around to today. Gamers, on a whole, are just better, because there's just a lot more information readily available than there was in Vanilla WoW. And people have been doing raids for a lot longer. Like, I can guarantee you, when the Vanilla WoW servers come up, well, Classic WoW I mean, and people start doing the raids, they'll be down in the raid bosses just as quickly as they do today. Because the raid bosses are harder than ever, in the Mythic mode anyway. Lots of people will complete normal or heroic mode and say raids are easy, while never getting a final raid kill in Mythic. Well, just Mythic. Because Mythic raids are still very hard. It's just the top guilds who do it have had years of experience and do it very well. And also, if you watch some of my top 10 videos on some of the most bosses that went longest without killing, all of them went that long because the fights themselves were fundamentally broken and impossible to kill, or because of some glaring bugs. Which, wow, hotfixes pretty quickly nowadays. The last time something like that happened in a modern raid was with Kill Jaden, and it took him a week to hotfix that, and people complained like crazy. Now, as for the storyline element, yeah, that is more like that's more of a personal preference. Like, sure, back in the day, there was no chosen one and you were just an adventurer going around completing quests like normal. But because of that, there wasn't really a story in Vanilla WoW. It was just a whole bunch of random things. And the end thing was just an amalgamation of random shit we did. We didn't really have a central, unified story until Wrath of the Lich King. Even with Illidan and Outlands, there's just a whole bunch of random crap people did. That's why they had to retcon so much of it with the Illidan novel. Because there wasn't really a strong single narrative. With the new version they do today, you can have a strong single narrative by having the player as some unimportant chosen one, who doesn't really impact the main plot of the story. It just allows your character to actually be in those events so that you can see them happening up front. But there's also lots of breadcrumb quests. Like, BfA has had some of the most amount of side quests ever. Like, there is just a huge amount of random side quests that don't have anything to do with the main story, that you can just go off and do whenever you want. Or you just discover them and do them while you're doing the main story. It's just now, there's a main story and a whole bunch of side quests. Whereas it used to be, it was basically just side quests. I don't think it's the questing that's the problem. I think it's more of the actual gameplay itself. But like I said, that could also just be a personal preference. Like, some people probably only enjoy the game if they're just a random mook who goes off and just does random things. And that's still the case today. In fact, people complain about, why is the Chosen One adventurer going off and collecting poop for the side quest? Alright, next one. How come you didn't talk about Titan forging? It is one damn huge point why people dislike BfA. That's true. I didn't talk about it. That's because I don't think that's the real issue. I think people are complaining about Titan forging because they're unhappy with the gear system itself. And that just seems like an easy target. But also, not to completely discount Titan forging as a problem in itself. After all, like, top raids would split run heroic runs just because of Titan forging, and because they could sometimes get better gear than their mythic stuff in heroic. I don't think you should be able to get gear better than mythic gear from heroic raids. But gear equal to a mythic raid, in the form of Titan forging, Sure, why not? And actually, someone else gives a really good comment that goes more into this. So I'm going to put this one on hold for now and just say, Titan forging is a problem, but I don't think it's as big of a problem as people think it is. Next one, your point about lack of customization is spot on. As a patchwork solution to Azerite gear, I believe all Azerite pieces, including the neck, should be enchantable, have secondary stats, and feature at least one gem slot each. That would help with some of us who are stuck with terribly low stats, as well as bring some customization back to the game. Yeah, I love that. Hey, add gem slots to all pieces of gear and allow everything to be enchanted, because the gold goblin inside of me just loves all those profit margins. They should also bring back pretty much every glyph they deleted from the game, as well as add ones to the mix. I don't think they should bring back every glyph they've deleted, because I made a video about the history of glyphs recently, so I read through a lot of those old glyphs, and some of them are terrible. Like, I remember one in particular that really stood out to me. A major glyph for priests in Wrath of the Lich King was a glyph that reduced the chance mind control would be resisted by 17%. A major glyph slot, something you use to increase the damage of your abilities or your healing or your survivability, was used as a way to reduce the chance to be resisted of one of your CC spells. It was only 17%. It wasn't a blanket immunity either. And I was like, wow, this is terrible. I can imagine it being useful in a very specific scenario where you're in PvP and your main job is to mind control people, so you want as much boost to it as possible. But like on a whole, you wouldn't want to take a glyph like that because it's so bad. Like maybe if that was added on, to an addition of the cast time of mind control is reduced in half or something, that would be fine. But like a lot of glyphs were like that, just really bad. I would like it if they added glyphs back in. But maybe if they were going to add in some of those old ones, they change them to not make them as terrible as they used to be. People usually only remember the really good glyphs. There was only a handful of glyphs each class actually used, and they ignored the rest. Also, let specs use the weapon types they were originally be able to. Two-hand enhancement, frost, windwalker, dual-wielding, unholy, and what have you. Lack of choice really hurts this game right now. Yeah, I've heard that a lot too. I don't actually know because I don't play any melee classes except a rogue, and they still do the same thing they always have. But I've heard this is a complaint people have, and I understand the complaint, and it seems reasonable. I was like, yeah, why don't they just do that? I'm sure there's a reason. Maybe it's just easier to balance around one type of weapon thing, like frost dual wielding. I remember it used to be they had specific talents for two-handed and one-handed, and people found out the one-handed version was better, so they only ever used that. And then Blizzard's like, hey, if they're only using the one-handed spec, might as well just give them everything for it. Lack of choices really hurt this game right now. Yeah, I agree with that. Lack of agency. I've played Vanilla in all the expansions, and BfA is my favorite expansion after Legion. The only criticism so far is the utility of Azerite armor and class balance for high Mythic Plus keys. I enjoy WoW more than ever in its expansion, and so does the majority of people I speak with, which is quite a lot on a daily basis in the game. Yeah, there's a thing people don't really get because there's such a hate train for BfA right now that a lot of people enjoy the game, and a lot of people don't use social media or go to the places where people are complaining the loudest. Like, if you were to go over to the WoW subreddit, you'd think everyone hated the game and why is anyone still playing? And then someone like me who makes WoW videos, and I see the comments all the time, people are still very much having fun with the game. And if you regularly participate in some of those places where there's just nothing but hate all the time, it can feel like everyone hates the game, that everyone agrees with you. Especially since the hate is coming from so many different sources, not just one. People, in this case, is a very vocal minority who think they speak for everyone. Most of them doesn't even know what they dislike about BfA. Very sad, it's not good for anything. I think it's more than a vocal minority at this point. It's definitely not a majority, though. I'd probably say anywhere from 15 to 40% of people who complain about it, legitimately have some kind of gripe about it. And a majority of people still like the game pretty much. And everyone else, just quit playing and are doing other things. So they're not complaining anymore. But I think in this case, it's not as small of a vocal minority. Also, most of them don't even know what they dislike about BfA. Like, I hear this comment sometimes. People don't know what they don't like about BfA. And it sounds really dismissive, but as someone who gets lots of angry comments every day, this is pretty spot on for a lot of people. Like, it may seem, I know exactly why I don't like BfA. I understand a lot of the criticism for it. A lot of people are very well spoken about what they don't dislike. But there is also a lot of people who just feel negatively about the game, and they don't really know why. So they just parrot what someone popular is saying about the game without really knowing the full extent of what they're even saying. Like, yeah, reason I quit this game was because of Titan forging. I hate the new gear. And there's probably a more underlying reason to it, but all they know is they don't like gear, they feel negatively towards it, and Titan forging seems like a good scapegoat for it. Their feelings are valid. They feel negative about it. They probably just don't understand why they feel negative about it, so they just parrot popular opinions. Which, perfectly fine. Words, after all, are just a way for us to express our thoughts into words for other people to understand us. Next one. BfA is basically shitty Legion. Yeah, that's pretty true, actually. To an extent. Because they took away so much from Legion without really adding too much that people like. Alright, this next one is a long one. I think the overall reason for me is the breaking of the fourth wall of the game, so to speak. We all have to suspend our disbelief a bit to accept the things in game are worth doing, and the rewards are meaningful. But BfA has basically done its best to prevent us from doing that. The illusion has been broken in a very big way, in a sense that the game no longer feels like a world with rules that you can conquer, and purely like an arbitrary theme park designed to eat your time. Yeah, you see, most people in the MMO sphere describe WoW as a theme park MMO, so that's pretty spot on. It's always in, people, it's not really a derogatory term. It usually is used in a derogatory term. Like, WoW isn't a real MMO because it's a theme park. It's just an illusion of choice. It's just trying to streamline you from 0 to max level, which is true. But they always say that as if, other games are much better because the leveling is more difficult. Which really just comes down to a subjective opinion. A subjective opinion that I kind of agree with as well. Number 1, level scaling. Technically a Legion change, but I think it's fair to group it with BfA due to the large expansion of its scale that came from patches leading up to BfA. This really turned leveling from an RPG into a chore you had to get through. Monsters no longer felt like the inhabitants of an area that could either be strong or weaker than you, but the game piece is designed to be placed in front of you, making the world feel incredibly fake, and character levels feeling hollow because of it. The front-loading of almost all character abilities to the first few levels doesn't help, because you really don't feel like you're developing in terms of abilities available to you. You don't seem to grow in power because of the lack of benchmarks you can measure with, and you don't grow in capability. All you're doing is playing the game until a number reaches 120. See, and that kind of perfectly describes what a theme park MMO is like. Which is basically what WoW is. The loss of artifacts. Never before has a system been taken away like that before. We're used to our gear being obsolete, but disabled? It's easy to accept new and shinier gear coming along and making what you have obsolete. But having something you worked for simply deleted from the game really was a blow to my ability to perceive character development as worthwhile. It's the same sort of confidence loss that causes an economic crash, but this is a loss in the confidence of rewards in this little game world, rather than a currency. This means I'm finding it insanely difficult to treat the heart of Azeroth as something to care about. Not only because I know it'll be turned off in a year or two, but because I have little micro-awesomes of this experience every time I get a new Azerite piece. Basically, artifacts were a new system added to the game that you spent the entire expansion working towards, and then they just get deleted. So, Azerite gear, which is just a downgraded version of that, seems less worthwhile because why work towards it like you did with the Legion one if it's just going to be deactivated at the end of the expansion, which is a fair thing to be brought up and something I didn't actually think about before. That does kind of feel right. That could explain some of the negative feelings towards losing the artifact and the Azerite system that replaces it. Gear homogenization and loss of gear goals. Gear now feels less like a goal to pursue. And not like a drip feed of generic numbers being given to me in a Skinner box format. This is thanks to personal loot being forced, making raids feel fake. Titan foraging in slots/trinkets making individual items lose their identity. And most non-raid loot sources for me, as a semi-casual, being random items from massive loot tables, where I can feel no real sense of being able to target desired paths of character progression. Now, I get the idea of this part. Gear no longer feels like a goal to pursue and just something you get while playing the game. And I think that's a really good point about why people used to be so excited for epics in vanilla WoW. And nowadays, people will use that as an excuse of why gear in modern WoW sucks. They would say, oh, in vanilla WoW, when you got an epic, it felt epic. And that was awesome. Nowadays, they give out epics like candy, so that's why I don't like the game. I was like, I don't think that's really the case. Maybe it's because epic gear, sure, it felt better because it was harder to obtain. That makes it feel better when you finally get it. Also, because it was a goal to pursue. And because it lasted longer. When you actually got those epic gears, or epic pieces of gear, or just, other pieces of gear. There was lots of, blue items in vanilla WoW that you used all the way until, Wrath of the Lich King even, because they were so good. There isn't anything like that anymore. Everything can be replaced, basically, in the next raid tier. So it's all just temporary item power-ups. And none of it really has any lasting value like it used to be, which can give gear the illusion of being more important than it used to be. And I don't think it's as simple as, epic gear just drops like crazy and it's not rewarding anymore. I think it's more like gear itself just doesn't work like it used to. It's just something you're kind of given now from lots of random sources. It's just kind of more replaceable than it used to be, which makes it feel less meaningful. Especially with all the bells and whistles they try to do to make the gear feel more important with Titan foraging and giving them trinkets, with Titan foraging and giving them extra little stats, like Undestructible or Leech or sockets. Is Leech still a thing in the game? I don't know, I play a healer, so I don't really pay attention to that stat. No, I think it is. I play my Demon Hunter a lot, and, he gains the Leech whenever he goes into Metamorphosis form. Anyway, so now where am I left? I don't care about levels, I don't care about gear, I don't care about the heart, so all that's left is collectibles. Collectibles are in a strange place, however. They require me to be invested in the game elsewhere for those cosmetic items to exist in a context where having them has value to me. See, that's true too. If you don't really like the rest of the game, there's no real point in getting collectibles. Because there's plenty of dead games out there with lots of cosmetic items, and why would you play those games to have cosmetic items in a game that you don't even want to play? Having the rest of the game be fun is what gives collectibles, cosmetic items, their value, is so that you can show them off in other parts of the game. And this was a good comment. I think I might be off about my whole gear philosophy, and why old epics felt better than new epics. I don't know. I'm sure someone will correct my line of thinking in the comments. Next one. The problem is clear. Too much pet battles. I disagree. I think there should be more pet battles. There should be a pet battle expansion, where they force everyone to have to pet battle in order to do a boss. That would be the best way to do anything in this game. WoW used to be about the journey to level cap. Now it's a rush and you were supposed to raid, which is why they are the only decent parts. It should be like a cruise, about the journey and your character. Can you imagine how cool it would be if they hadn't instanced the PvPers and separated them? Simply flagging PvP instead of separating the players would have been neat. You could have seen the battles, perhaps get hyped up, flag, and start fighting. I also would like to play one of the new races. I would be doing that right now, actually. See, this one, it's a pretty good philosophy on it. WoW used to be about the journey, and now it's only about the destination, which is pretty true. Like, that reminds me of a video Hamster Will made recently. He's a private server WoW YouTuber, and he decided to make a video about him trying out BfA for the first time, because he hadn't actually played a live version of WoW in, I don't know, really long time. About 10 years or something. 5 to 10 years, somewhere around there. And he went into BfA and judged BfA based on the leveling experience. So a lot of people gave him crap in the comments, basically saying, you can't judge modern WoW by its level up experience like you could for private servers. because the old version of WoW, leveling up was part of the game. Modern WoW, it's not. It's just something you do until you get to max level. Max level is where the real game is at, which is why I thought this comment was particularly decent. That's a really good way to put it. But also, the PvPer thing, I completely disagree with that. As someone who played on a PvP server and hated it the whole time, I love the new system because it finally allowed me to not be in a PvP world on my PvP server. See, I'm only on this server because that's where my friend was playing, and I swapped to this server to play with him to do raids. And I don't like world PvP at all. I never attacked people unprovoked, and I always just basically ran away from people who ganked me. And I hated it. And if I saw people fighting each other, I never joined in the fight. Because it was always like 5 people ganging up on one alliance player. Or 5 alliance players ganging up on me. World PvP is inherently unbalanced, and that's what people who like world PvP love about it. They don't like fair fights, they do world PvP to have unfair battles. Blizzard can't come out and say that. They can't say, the reason people like world PvP is because they love the unfair nature of it. So they try their best to cater to the world PvPers, without telling the general audience what it's really about. Because if they liked fair PvP, there is fair PvP modes in the game. And also, one of the big reasons I don't like world PvP, personally, that I don't really want to get too much into, and that's because I have PTSD from a surprise attack when I was on my jog one day. So I don't like being attacked randomly out in the world, and I'm really glad that I don't have to deal with that anymore. Next up, I have never played BfA, but I can tell you why I didn't return to WoW to try it. Most of the world is still empty. You are teleported to places after doing a queue, and the world is no world in the World of Warcraft. I get they did damage control by having the daily quests in certain areas, but that's just some areas, and apparently it's face roll easy and doesn't result in meeting people, forming groups, doing spontaneous PvP. World quests, it's all daily quests, it's all world quests now. It's a completely different system, and it does actually get you out into the world and meeting people. Just not in the way you'd expect. You see people, but you don't talk to them. Trade is done through the auction house, so there's no social element. I don't need to befriend the top blacksmith or enchanter that have this one rare recipe. People don't bring me mats to craft them. The top crafters don't know each other by name, and trading is basically PvE where you don't interact directly with people. Yeah, I love that. I don't like talking to people. I love the auction house. And the auction house goblins know each other, because they're the top ones always trying to undercut each other. Most items don't last very long, are quickly replaced, and don't feel like the recent drop is a big improvement to your power, and feel you got lucky and brag about it. Basically, the power level staircase feels like an escalator. Yeah, that's true. I think I was talking about that in a very roundabout way that didn't make too much sense. But that's kind of the general idea of it. Again, I haven't played this expansion, these are just my last feelings from WoW, updated with watching channels like yours and asking former guildmates. I wish the game slowed down, gave meaningful upgrades, and brought back the M in RPG, into the MMORPG. For someone who hasn't actually played BfA, yeah, those are things people are complaining about. Less meaningful upgrades, and the game is too fast for leveling, because it's all about just getting to level cap. The actual game of leveling isn't really a thing in modern WoW, but it should be, to an extent. I don't know, there's some people who wish, leveling was just deleted, and you just went straight to max level. One of the biggest issues with the game for me and a lot of the friends that I play with is the Gcd Change. It's terrible and makes the entire pace of the game feel unbearably slow. I can't stand it. For my Dispriests, there's only one spell they added to the Gcd that I actually notice, and that's like Rapture. What Rapture does is it increases the absorption of Power Word Shield by like 200% for 8 seconds. So if I use it and I have fast enough haste, I should be able to cast about 8 shields before the buff goes away. But it's on the Gcd. So when I push the button, it activates Rapture. I basically just have to wait a Gcd before I can start applying bubbles to people. And it's a very noticeable cooldown thing. Like, I'm just waiting to use the spell, and it's such a small window of opportunity too. That's like 7 seconds to apply bubbles, which usually means you get out about 6 of them, assuming you didn't have to stop to do something else in the middle of it. So I I feel the GCD change with that one thing. And it's not a very important cooldown, so it's not the worst thing in the world. But it would be nice if I could start bubbling immediately after I press the button. And I assume other classes who have more cooldowns on the GCD like that, I can't imagine it feels, all that much better. I don't hate this yet. I mean, it's been 5 months. I think it's just doing fine at the start of a new expansion, so anyone that hates this is just bored of the game itself. You see, I think this is also another argument that people don't really talk about very much. Is a lot of the people, they're dissatisfied with a lot of the parts of the game, which don't make them really like it as much anymore. And also, they've been playing it for so long that they're probably just kind of bored of the game itself. Because, I mean, you can't play something forever and not get bored of it unless you have some kind of personality quirk that allows you to do the same thing over and over and never get bored of it. Like for me, I play other games. And I still play a lot of WoW too. I just kind of like cycle about what I like to do for that particular expansion. Because I don't know if any of you know this or not, but I also have a second successful channel, my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. It's been doing so well recently that it's actually eclipsed how much my WoW channel has been making for the past month. And that's basically just because one of the videos is doing super well right now. But that just goes to say, I do other stuff in my life. I'm a person who loves to have many different hobbies to choose from, and I like to try new things. And there's some people where WoW is just the only game they ever play. But then again, just because people only play the one game, that's not really the be-all, end-all argument for, you just don't like the game because you play it too much. Well, that doesn't really discount the criticisms, though. They should be able to play the game as much as they want. They're also allowed to complain about the things they don't like about it. But at the same time, yeah, probably they're just kind of bored of the game style itself. But it also could just be compounded by, some of the things in the game. It's not a complete dismissal of those people. Sure, they probably are playing it too much, but also they do have legitimate complaints about it that would definitely increase their enjoyment of the game. I do believe the housing would solve one problem, the world feeling empty. Blizzard can add it so that in order to gain stuff through housing, you have to do certain things in different zones in every expansion, giving people reasons to go back to them. Better yet, let's make it so you need to use your professions that require mats from all over the world, because at the moment, most of them feel absolutely useless. I don't have anything to really add to this, I just agree with everything he said. A talent tree with 110 talents would be pretty nice for leveling. It wouldn't affect the endgame at all, because you'd have 100% of the talent at max level. But it would give you some choice while leveling, and a little bonus for each ding. This is an excellent idea that I didn't even think about. This is kind of like how the artifact system worked. You eventually got all of the talents in the artifact tree. It's just you got to choose which ones you got first. I think this would kind of solve the problem that was inherent with my suggestion of having a leveling talent tree and then you get your real talent at max level. This would be a good way to do it. 110 talents you got for every level. That's a ton of talents, though. They'd have to do some, Path of Exile talent tree in order to incorporate all of them. Maybe the Cataclysm system where you got one every 2 levels. Hell, even, I want to say every 5 levels. That would probably work, too. But, getting something every level would be great. And then just getting all of them at max level. I think that'd be a good way to give them the illusion of choice while they're leveling up, while actually not really changing much things at endgame, because, for all the complaints talents get, most people are in agreement that the talent tree at max level is perfectly fine. That's not one of the complaints people have with BfA. People like the talent trees. To an extent. I mean, there's always going to be people who complain about it. But on a whole, there's nowhere near as much negative reaction to the talent trees as there is for, the Azeroth system, removal of tiers, or Titan forging to an extent. You didn't really hear much about Legion PvP because it was horrendous and dead. First expansion, I just gave up on PvP. Primarily due to the preset stats, which sucked because there was little to no customization of your playstyle, and a lot of the preset stats were so poorly done that a lot of the classes were unplayable until later on in the expansion, if at all. Yeah, I didn't really do Legion PvP, so I didn't really know about any of this. I just kind of read it to give maybe other people, you know, this is what PvP was probably like. One of the things that I dislike about this game nowadays is how small it feels. There's little to no reason to go back to old places, no exploration. I think a good thing would be to give good rewards for completing the story of a zone. Imagine if they created a transmog set, with each piece would come from completing the quest of a zone, like Tanaris, or a gorilla mount for completing Stranglethorn. Those places would become alive again, I guess. You see, I like the idea, but like, how would they retroactively give that to people who've already completed everything there? Because there's plenty of people who've already done like every single quest. Plenty of people have done every quest in the game. That's absurd. There's only a few people who've done that. There's plenty of people who've completed lots of the quests in the game, so they'd have to just retroactively give them a whole bunch of rewards. I like the idea of that. I think it would have to be implemented a little bit differently, though. There needs to be a destruction mage rant. I read this because it's like, you know, that seems like a decent enough idea that I can't really think of how I would implement it. Because you see, the weather bot, DevBot, he's just a character from one of my past Machinima series that I threw in there because I thought it would be funny. And I could also probably throw in the Destruction Mage in certain parts, but he's a little bit more cringy than DevBot. People already don't... Well, I mean, on a whole, people like DevBot. There are some people who don't like it. They just want the news and no bullshit, which is fair. Like, I don't advertise my channel as, you know, we only do show you the important stuff and to the point with none of that bullshit. Because no, there's definitely a little bit of bullshit in my news videos. But I don't know about Destruction Mage. He's kind of a cringy character. I don't know. Like, people are fine with DevBot to an extent. I think the Destruction Mage would be a little bit too much. Alright, this next one is kind of a long one. It feels like the Azeroth system is some sort of amalgamation of issues they've shown in WoW before. The lack of rewards for leveling talent-wise, the ambiguity of gear's value introduced with the reforging, and the frustration of choosing between stat/item levels and set bonuses/trinkets/traits. The Azeroth system is to the Legion artifact system what modern talents are to the talent tree system, where the latter offered a reward at every level, the former has a lot of levels that grant nothing. It just makes Azeroth nowhere near as tempting to grind his artifact power back in Legion. Yeah, that's a really good point. I never really thought of it like that before. Like, artifact system, I just said, was a really good description of how they could make leveling more interesting. And Azeroth system is kind of like how the modern talent point system works, where it's fine at max level, but it doesn't feel good to actually level it up. Another issue is how the artifacts arguably go against Blizzard's intent to make the game more intuitive and accessible for new players, by making upgrades less immediately apparent. A piece of Azeroth gear's value is a function of its item level /stats, and its traits relative to those already equipped Azeroth equipment. Meaning, you'll more than likely need to use Ask Mr. Robot or something to determine whether or not an item is an upgrade. Yeah, that's true. A third issue is the frustration of having to choose between stat/item levels and traits when it comes to Azeroth gear, an issue Artifact Relics had. If a piece of gear has a better trait but a lower item level, it makes a tough spot for players who really want to bump up their item level for Raid/Mythic Plus pugs. If a piece of gear has a lousy trait but enough stats to make it an upgrade over what they have equipped despite having a BIS trait, can be just as frustrating, especially if the trait impacts the rotation. Yeah, those are all fair points. This is just a really good comment about some of the negatives and fallings with the Azeroth system. Next one, you should stick to telling stories and top 10s. You don't know anything about playing the game. Yeah, that's true. Wildstar had amazing housing and still died. Peace be upon it, sniff. Also, every class and mount had the Demon Hunter double jump. Oh, it was glorious. Wait, in Wildstar, every class and mount had the Demon Hunter double jump? That'd be great. Like, I was running Nomergon the other day for a video, and it was really nice having that double jump and glide for everything. Especially since Nomergon has so many parts where you basically just fall down a pit. Nomergon is so huge. Like, I don't play Alliance very much, like at all. So I don't really know Nomergon as well as I do something like Wailing Caverns. You know, the equivalent low-level dungeon on the Horde side. Like, I know Wailing Caverns like the back of my hand, and I didn't know Nomergon was that big. It's gigantic. It was such a pain in the A in order to get all the way over there. Anyways, WildStar had amazing housing and still died. WildStar had one raid tier. Like, there was a lot of problems with WildStar, and housing wasn't one of them, and it definitely wasn't going to save the game. That's not really a good thing to say, you know, WildStar had this amazing feature and it still died. WoW is a much better game than WildStar. And WildStar was just a hot mess. Like, there's so much I read about the game and videos I've seen about it, and it's just like a wonder that the game existed at all, with just the incompetence and the higher levels for that video game company. Ugh. Like, oh man, it is a very interesting read about just the mess that was WildStar, you know, behind the scenes. Like, there is so many reasons why WildStar failed. And I guess the amazing housing thing, oh sure, it's probably like one of the few good things about the game. I personally enjoy BfA at the moment, mostly because I have my guildmates who I raid with and do Mythic Plus. WoW is just a way to socialize with people. And that part as fun as it was before. But there are big problems. Class design is a big one. GCD feels so horrible, especially after a fast-paced expansion like Legion. But there are big problems. Class design is a big one. GCD feels so horrible, especially after such a fast pace. Azeroth armor is such a bad mechanic. It's so boring. They feel like stat buffs, which most of them are. It's not comparable with Legion legendaries, set items, artifacts, etc., which were all removed. And it doesn't change talents when you switch specs. And costs exponentially more gold for re-rolling it. That's not really true. I think that's only something people who don't actually re-roll their stats, or re-roll them like literally all the time, have a problem with. Because the re-roll costs for Azeroth traits reset after a while. So anyways, let's go back to the comment. So basically, punishes people who play multiple specs. Gold making was such a dud this expansion as well. There's just no good way to do it. Maybe sell some consumables, but still feels very weak. Yeah, they definitely made it harder to make gold this expansion. That's just true. And they've also added a lot more better rewards for spending your gold. If anything, they finally solved their gold inflation problem, which was a really big problem for the last couple expansions. New content been kinda lame for me. Not a huge fan of islands and warfronts, but I'm not forced to do them. I got my gear and AP without farming either of them, so it's not a negative side really, just kinda lame. You know, unpopular opinion, I actually kinda like the warfronts. Islands, not so much. The last one's downside I can think about is probably a story. There has been so many loopholes and just bad writing in general. In my opinion, I don't really care for a story as much, just disapproving observing it, and only because I love story in Warcraft 3. I see this a lot. A lot of people complain about the story. Like, sure, there's legitimate complaints to have about it, but on a whole, the storytelling in BfA is great. Most people complain about it don't actually know what's going on or have read the books. But that is like one of the complaints of the story, is if you have actually read everything and you know what's going on, the story is pretty good. But, you know, you kind of have to find that all out for yourself. If you're a casual player who, you know, doesn't really care too much about lore, but you're still getting lore pieces of information while you're going through the game, and you hear other people who don't know anything about lore saying that it's bad, then it can definitely feel like it's bad. Like, I am critical of the lore to an extent. I kind of handwave a lot of things because, you know, it's a video game. Lore in a video game is just kind of like a bonus, and the fact that WoW's lore is good is unusual. That is not the standard for, you know, massive multiplayer games like this. And even with the low standards, you know, that WoW is a MMO, the story is surprisingly good. And in BfA, I'm legitimately excited to see what happens next. Like, there was a whole bunch of complaints with the BfA data mining stuff that came up, and I had a huge problem with Sourfang's storyline that they fixed. Like, I even had a whole video written out for it to complain about it, and they fixed the main problem with it. And I was like, well, I spent all this effort for nothing. I'll just put it on Patreon. I was like, you know, here's an abandoned script I made. Which I think I did that yesterday. Anyways, the story, there's no loopholes or anything. There's no bad writing. It's just people who don't know anything about lore who say that. Or, you know, not to dismiss them. People who just generally, legitimately know all of the lore and just don't like it. That's definitely a case too. It's just, in my experience, a lot of the people who say these things don't actually know all the lore, which in itself could be a problem on Blizzard's part for not explaining the lore in an easy enough manner to everyone. There's lots of subtleties to it that they don't blatantly explain, that people have to figure out on their own, which is this tall tale sign of a good story. Next up, how about this? The decorative items for player houses must be crafted using mats from all various professions. Like, tailors can make a flag or banner or curtains, but if you want to dye those certain colors, then you need dyes made from scribes. You'd need parts made by blacksmith for furniture farming. Leatherworkers could make upholstery and animal skin rugs. Oh, and herbalists could just make flower arrangements. I miss professions too. Nothing more to add to this. These are all just solid ideas, and I think would be honestly super great for professions. Give them something else to do. At the 8-0 mark, class balancing isn't terrible because my main is in a good spot. Yeah, okay, pal. Tell that to the Shadow Priests, Prot Warriors, Guardian Druids, and Enhanced Shamans. I think they stopped watching the video at that part because I definitely didn't say that. And I talked about how my class is good and other classes aren't so good, and that's why people are complaining about it. My biggest complaint with WoW, since at least Kata, is that it seems like for every one thing that gets at least one thing removed, it seems like for every one thing that gets at least one thing gets removed. People hate when stuff is taken away from them. Just to list the most prominent: the Old World, along with many quests and items, some spells, class quests, were removed in Cataclysm. Old talent trees, spells outside just spellbooks, small raids, class favor abilities removed in MoP. Many class abilities, reforging sockets, and enchants removed in WoD. Yeah, that was a big one. I didn't like that change. Glyphs, PvP gear, all buffs, removed in Legion. PvE raid tiers, more class abilities, artifacts, removed in BfA. Also, it makes absolutely no sense that my shitty green stick of versatility is more powerful than the Ashbringer. Yeah, those are all pretty legit things. Basically, every expansion just takes away things, when it used to be every expansion added things to the game. It's just, they still do add stuff. I don't think they added enough to supplement what was taken away this time around. That could be another one of the reasons people aren't too happy right now. Less than 1.7 mil subs in September. Please let this dumpster fire finally be out of its misery. That was a false rumor. That got disproven like literally the same day. I just wanted to point that out just in case anyone else believes that rumor. That's all the comments that I chose. There was like 200 of them, and I chose like 26 of them, which is way too many. Next time I'm only going to choose like 10 of them at most. And maybe a couple of really small ones I can answer really quickly. It's just, there was a lot of good comments on this, and I just picked ones, because there was a lot of repeat things, people parodying the same opinions just in different ways. So I just kind of chose like the first ones or the top voted ones I came across. And there won't be a reply to this video. This discussion is basically done for the most part. But if you have ideas for suggestions for other discussion videos, you can definitely leave them as a comment to this, as I'll have the new discussion posted probably the next day after this video comes out.